Look, we spare no expense. No expense. Here we are on the Geelong foreshore. I've come right to Geelong. I've come up here to Geelong, or down here to Geelong, or wherever Geelong is in Victoria, to be with my mates the trolls. Now, trolls have no fear of COVID-19 because they live underground. They have no fear. So I want you to have no fear. I'm not telling you not to take all the necessary precautions which the government is letting you know about, but fear is the enemy of rational response to some type of threat. Now, last week and the week before, we actually described what COVID-19 was, what you could do in order to protect yourself, where it came from. This week, we're going to take a wider, more philosophical, ideological position on the issue of COVID-19. And I'm going to look at the economic consequences and the failure of capitalism. And capitalism is a very simple concept. It's about private investment for private gain. And that is the underlying philosophical, ideological background to our society. We're a society which is based on the concept of private investment for private gain. And what we've seen over the last 40 years, during the deregulation, corporatisation, privatisation, globalisation revolution which has swept across this country and the rest of the earth, is we have seen the public arena shrunk and shrunk. So today in 2021, when faced with a crisis which doesn't respect gender or sexual orientation or age, doesn't respect anything, national boundaries, national borders, capitalism as an economic framework has been found to be not only wanting but has failed miserably. Anybody looking at the queues of people around Centrelink in the last few days and today, and I saw a number of queues today in Melbourne, highlights how capitalism has failed us in terms of dealing with crisis. A government which puts the interests of the corporate sector, that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, before the interests of the people it governs, cannot provide viable, long-term solutions to the current crisis. Now, Mr Morrison will tell you, our beloved Prime Minister, will tell you this is a 1 in 100 year event. This is not a 1 in 100 year event. This is the beginning of a series of pandemics which will, over the next 100 years, cause a great deal of difficulty around the globe. And this has occurred for 4 reasons. 1, increasing population growth. We now have 7.5 billion people on the planet. Finite resources, irrespective of the scientific advances we've made, we have finite resources to work with. There is no other planet Earth. There is not a second planet out there. Then we have the concept of a climate of emergency, which has been made by human beings as we expand and as we pursue a growth for growth's sake, profit for profit's sake ideology. And last but not least is the domination of an economic system which is based on private investment for private profit. Now, currently the government is scrambling to get ahead of this particular crisis, and there will be more shutdowns, there will be more layoffs, there will be more people who will find themselves in the same situation the 30% of Australians who rely on social security benefits to survive have found themselves in for decades in this country, and in worse situations, because the bottom 30% economically don't have any assets. They've got to pay rent. They may be lucky enough to be in public, the shrinking amount of public housing available, but they don't have leases like many small businesses have. They don't pay exorbitant rents for a roof over their head, which most working people are doing today. 40% of Australians currently pay rent. So we're faced with a situation where 40 years of economic reform has led us to this point where we are not able as a community to deal with a pathetic little virus like COVID-19. This is not a virus with a mortality rate of 20% or 30% or 40%. In most situations, the mortality rate is around 3%. In the elderly, it's over 8%. And that's why I've seen such a high mortality rate in Italy, which has an average age of 47.2 years. So what am I proposing? We've been told it's all about competition, competition, competition. In every disaster that we have faced as human beings through the history of humanity, in every situation we have faced. Right, competition has been our guiding force, but in every disaster that we have faced, we've been told about cooperation, mutual aid. Now, the first basic change we need to make in a society is the introduction of a universal basic income for every man and woman and young person over the age of 18 and over in this country. What is a universal basic income? With increased industrialisation, IT and artificial intelligence, we do not need every person in this society to work. We just don't need everybody to work. And in a society where your status and your ability to enjoy life is basically dependent on the amount of disposable income you have, if you don't have a job, you're basically excluded from the productive and process. So universal basic income is the concept of giving every person a fixed income which is paid to them every 2 weeks. This gets rid of the need to have a huge Centrelink apparatus, which with the disastrous consequences we've seen today. It gets rid of the problems of actually having people apply for particular benefits. And those people who decide that they want to continue to work and earn money would be taxed on that universal basic income, and anybody else who relies on the basic universal income as their sole source of income wouldn't have to pay any tax. So say if you earn twice the universal basic income, half would come back in tax. If you earn 4 times the universal basic income, it'll all come back to the Treasury in tax. So you would decrease the bureaucracy greatly. You would ensure that if a crisis comes, that people's economic necessities can be met. And that is the problem today. The economic necessity to service a mortgage, service a business lease, pay rent in an increasing number of people as more and more industries are shut down, cannot be serviced. But if you've got a universal income, what that does is provide that support. So how do you fund it? Well, it's very simple. There are 3 simple ways we could have an extraordinary life in this country, everybody. 1, a 1% stock market turnover tax. Every time a share is bought or sold, 1% goes directly to the Treasury. It's all computerised today, easy to do. 2, you could have a 1% turnover tax with companies that have a turnover of more than $2 million per year. That would raise another $100 billion. That's almost $180 billion raised every year. And last but not least, we have some of the most extraordinary mineral deposits in this country. Uranium, coal, iron ore, bauxite, rare minerals, rare sands, diamonds, gold, silver, copper, and the list goes on and on. Each and every one of those industries is dominated by a small number of corporations. We should think seriously about nationalising the mining sector. In Norway, 90% of the profits which are made from mining go into a special fund for the people of Norway. In Australia, things are so ludicrous that we don't have enough gas on the east coast, because when the government signed contracts with 2 corporations regarding extracting gas from the North Shore, from the North Australia, that they didn't actually think about the fact that we needed gas in Australia. So we are now looking at the situation of actually importing gas, although we're the second greatest exporter of gas after Qatar in the world. So a universal basic income. Another thing we could actually think of is, what is the purpose of paying superannuation if you can lose half of it in 7 weeks? What is the purpose of working for a lifetime to have a nest egg which you're then going to be able to use for your retirement age? There is no purpose. There is nothing more ridiculous than having money in superannuation funds which invest in the stock market, which goes up and down on a daily basis. People's futures have now been destroyed. It's all very well to say that once the COVID virus returns, it's business as usual. It's not going to be business as usual. Think of all those small businesses, 2 million of them. How many of them are going to have to break their leases? How many of them are going to have to break their leases? Because they have currently, they and casual and part-time workers, they are the ones who've taken the brunt of the current closures. It's not full-time workers in the construction industry, but it is workers who are casual and part-time in entertainment, in hospitality, tourism. And it's those small companies, those little shops around the country, which Mr. Morrison, says the backbone of the Australian economy, which have been shut down. And most of them work on a hand-to-mouth basis and make enough profit to survive, not become rich and powerful. They have leases they can't get out of. There are people who've got leases for rent they can't get out of. So things the government could do today is, 1, suspend all repayments on mortgages for 6 months. 2, pass legislation which will prevent landlords and landladies from evicting tenants who can't pay rent. 3, work out some type of rent support system, because if you can defer mortgages for 6 months and defer rents for 6 months, it negates itself out in most cases, because most properties which are rented out are negatively geared anyway and have a mortgage on them. Look at what happened in the United Kingdom. 60 to 80% of a person's wage automatically goes into their account. I've been speaking to people who've been going through the old Centrelink hoops, and there's nothing worse than Centrelink. And what brought it home to me was the fact that you need a customer reference number. Could you imagine that? A customer reference number, not a social security reference number, not an Australian reference number, but a customer reference number. So what we are now enjoying is the excesses of 40 years of neoliberalism, and that's what we're enjoying. So people really need to think about this very clearly, because if this little piddly virus, COVID-19, can cause so much damage to so many people, not just medically but economically, it can destroy lives. It has destroyed people's abilities to retire. It has destroyed tens of thousands of small businesses which are closed as I speak. It will destroy tens of thousands of more small businesses will continue to close. The large corporations will survive. It has destroyed the work prospects of 1 million Australians this week, and maybe 2.5, 3 million next week as more and more industries close. Because see, most people don't have those great reserves that a small percentage of people have. They have no reserves. They're living on a week-to-week basis. So we need today to start thinking beyond COVID-19. What type of society do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a society which is based on competition, profits for profit's sake, growth for growth's sake, a society where there are ups and downs, every decade or so? Or do you want to live in a society which can tackle the issue of a climate emergency, which can ensure citizens and residents have access to basic necessities? To some degree, we are better cushioned in this country to deal with COVID-19 than most other countries in the world. One, we have a social security system, despite successive governments attempting to destroy that social security system and driving people who rely on social security benefits into poverty. No wonder we have 700,000 children living in poverty in this extremely rich country. Two, we have a universal medical insurance scheme which is called Medicare, and a strong public housing sector. And although successive governments, especially Liberal National Party governments, have tried to destroy Medicare in a variety of ways, it is still there. And the public hospital sector is still there, although $6 billion to $8 billion every year goes into the pockets of the private health insurance industry. So we have the basis to actually deal with this issue on a medical footing. We may not have enough ventilators currently, we may not have enough testing kits, but we have the infrastructure which can deal with this situation. An educated medical workforce who understand what is going on, a good public hospital infrastructure which can deal with the situation in the majority of cases, and we also have we also have a social security system, irrespective of the holes in that safety net. It is there. Most countries do not have a social security system. They don't have a public health system. Look at what's happening in Indonesia today, where people are dying in the streets of COVID-19. So we are well set to deal with this issue, but we need to start discussing major structural reforms which entail the introduction of a universal healthcare system, and a universal that's well funded. Reforms which entail looking at a universal basic living wage, a universal living wage for each and every individual in this country. We also need to look at the prospect of forming cooperatives and collectives which practice mutual aid, in creating a third tier of the economy, one which is not reliant on government or the corporate sector, one which is reliant on people coming together with a common interest, producing goods and services. They won't get rich, but at least they'll have a decent life. So we need to look at things. We need to look at how do we fund superannuation. Do we put superannuation money in the stock markets and see it disappear over a few weeks, or do we create a national fund through nationalising mineral resources in this country by introducing a 1% stock market turnover tax, and by introducing a 1% turnover tax for companies in this country? These are the things we should be starting to think about today and start discussing today. The COVID virus will come and go. COVID-19 will come and go. People will die. We will fare better than most societies as we face it. But around the corner will be another COVID-19, because as the population grows and we put more and more emphasis on factory farming in the sea and on the land, it's highly likely that more and more viruses which reside in animals and seafood, and sea life, will cross that boundary into human beings. And as we do not have the technical expertise, antibodies, we don't have them. We have people surviving today into their 80s and 90s and 100. We have people with severe disabilities surviving, and they survive not just because of medical advances, but because we are that type of society which attempts to value every human life and every human being. So we need, if we want to continue like that, we need to make changes. Mr. Trump, he thinks, well, we won't worry about social isolation. The cure is worse than the disease. If 20 or 30 million Americans die, it doesn't really matter. There's another 290 million we can exploit to make a buck from. And that's what governments around the world, in the back of their head, they're thinking. Do we tackle this, or do we let it just ride over the population? More importantly, that's the background thinking, but more importantly, we don't want to do that. We don't want to be that type of society which says these human beings are disposable. And in order to ensure that we continue the struggle to ensure that every human being is not disposable, we need to make major economic changes. We need to hold wealth collectively and share that wealth. We need to create wealth collectively. We need to use our wealth, the wealth of the country, for the benefit of the people, not just for the benefit of the major shareholders of major corporations in this planet. If there is one figure that highlights how things have changed in Australia in the last 40 years, it's this figure, and this figure alone. 40 years ago, if you invested $1 and you made a profit from that dollar, 66 cents of that profit would go back to the people, the workers who created that profit for you, and 34 cents would go back to the investor. Today, 66 cents goes back to the investor and 34 cents goes back to the workforce. So we have seen increasing number of people not being able to buy a home. We've seen a decrease in the amount of public housing which is available. We've seen the privatisation of essential services. I had to laugh today when I heard that the Australian Army was going to assist us, but before it could assist the Australian people, it would have to talk to its Kuwaiti partners who it had contracted to provide emergency services for Australians in times of a disaster. How pathetic. Not even the Australian Army has the resources to provide services because they've had to contract out services. And it's the same to a significant degree in the public hospital sector. So we need to reverse privatisation. We need to discuss the concept of nationalisation. We need to provide seeding funding for cooperatives and collectives. We need to talk about mutual aid and cooperation, not competition. We need to make radical changes if we want to survive as a species into the 22nd century. Now my friend here, the gnome, or the troll, my friend the troll, has been listening to all this and he's fallen off his perch and he's sliding down the rock. I don't want you to be weak like this troll, okay? I want you to be strong. I want you to look after yourself. I want you to look after your family. I want you to look after your friends, because we will need you for PIPSI. Public interests before corporate interests. Join us today. Go to the website pipsi.net, download the application form, fill it out, send it back online if you can't leave home. Look at our website pipsi.net. We are a collection of individuals who want to become a registered political party on the federal arena to introduce these concepts into the day-to-day debate. We are not just a political party, we are a social movement. We have over 400 members currently. We're trying to get 550 on the electoral roll to register the federal political party. So if you think that it's time for change, don't throw up your hands in despair and hoard toilet paper and baked beans, because I can't find any and I'm blaming you for that. Take the future in your hands. Join us. Become a member of public interest before corporate interests. Make that new world in your that new world in your heart a reality. Thank you. Next week we'll be back here in Geelong. This is a great place to live. I don't actually live here. I drove here all the way from Glen Waverley because my producer, and she'll remain nameless, was too scared to come to Melbourne. And I agree with her. Stay away from people. Keep healthy. Keep safe. We need you.